thank you all for coming. It's nice to be here in person with you all, and we got some folks joining us virtually as well. Um, and so this recording will be made available on YouTube later for people to check out later. So feel free to share with your friends. And for those joining us virtually, thank you for joining. I know folks who are on East Coast time joining at 9:30 p.m. So thank you all troopers out there. Um, cool. So I'm gonna take my clicker and share some slides with you. We're gonna go through some intro. The agenda is I will do some introduction about what we're doing here, followed by the workshop with Bake Curious. I'll take about an hour, and then after that we'll have some mixer with refreshments. This is a great crowd, and it's a beautiful day, so hopefully we'll be able to use the terrace as well. All right, so my name is Eric Don. I'm the community manager of the Podcast Garage at KQED. This is a collaboration between PRX and KQED. PRX is a nonprofit media, and we support the work of journalists, storytellers through radio, podcasting, digital media. We distribute shows like This American Life, The Moth, Reveal. We also have an independent network of podcasters through Radiotopia. We also do a lot of trainings for podcasters who are trying to take their craft to the next level. And we have two podcast garages, which are our community building efforts. One's in Boston and one's here at KQED. So this is our first embedded radio station model. And we also have some pop-ups that's in different cities. One is coming up in DC and one in Atlanta. If you sign up for our newsletter, you can check out where we're going to be in the coming months. So in the spirit of sharing resources and getting people to connect, we've got resources for podcasting here from some of our partners. AIR is the Association of Independents in Radio. They have a great newsletter that shares a lot of resources. They have classes virtually and also some mingles in person in different cities. And they have a freelancer tool, like freelancer tools on their website that you can check out, and a nice database of all the AIR members. PRX and Google has this podcast creator program with a series of 10 videos on how to get your podcast started. It talks about the design of your podcast, talks about how to connect with your audience. So you should check that out if you want to check out this video tutorial. And then there's transam.org. They've been around for a long time. They make articles, write articles on the craft of podcasting and audio storytelling, the business side of things, and the artistic side. And they, along with PRX, made the Sound School podcast, which is a podcast about podcasting. Very meta and very cool. And then we also want to shout out some of the recording studios around us that do rentals. So WAM, Women's Audio Mission. Yes, woohoo! Yeah, and then we have Bayvac as well. They're down on 9th Street, so a few blocks away from us. And then KLW, which is also pretty close. So they all have recording studios that you can use to track, narrate, do any kind of recording, invite guests, etc. Cool. So to continue on the theme of like resources, WAM is offering this Pro Tools certification that starts in April. So if you're interested in becoming a certified Avid user for Pro Tools, you should check it out. They have different rates depending on whether you're a member. It's on wham.rocks/Avid certification. Starts in April. You have to take both of those fundamentals classes to get certified, and then you take a test and you get certified. So it's kind of a cool collaboration between Avid and WAM. KLW, they have the KLW Audio Academy. This is a 9-month radio journalism program. They do it every year. It goes from September until June. So September this year to June of next year. You have to apply by April 21st. A lot of people go through that and continue on the audio journalism journey. So check it out. It's on their website, klw.org. Cool. Okay. So you're here tonight because we've got the team behind Bake Curious, Katrina Schwartz, who is a producer of Bake Curious, as well as Olivia Allen-Price, who is the host of Bake Curious. Who here listens to Bake Curious? Can I get a show of hands? Nice. So we got a mix of people who've listened and people who are new to Bake Curious. So for those who haven't listened, Bake Curious is a local podcast about the San Francisco Bay Area. And what's cool about them is that they take stories, they make stories based on listener feedback or questions. So listener comes in with questions, they pick the questions and then dive deep into answering them, and through that kind of find stories that show why the San Francisco Bay Area is unique. Um, and we want to give a shout out to Sierra Nevada for sponsoring Bay Curious. And so if you go into our cooler, you might find some beverages, including some Sierra Nevada. So thanks to them for the support. So tonight, Katrina and Olivia prepared a cool set of audio clips from their show. And the idea is that, they have 2 to 3 people podcast. You don't have a big team with a dedicated sound designer. How do you make audio stories immersive, engaging, and fun, right? And so they'll show you their creative process, their production process for how they use sounds from the field, from the studio, to make it interesting. And again, these are stories based off of listener questions, so they can be very historical or archival or sciencey. And so how do you, again, make it fit the audio format? Cool. So let's get started. Without further ado, please welcome Katrina and Olivia. So what's fun is that today you'll hear some audio clips and you'll also see some audition action as well.
We're an audition house here.
Cool.
Hello. Hi. Thank you all so much for coming. We are delighted to see so many faces out here. So Eric, if you want to advance the next slide, we will show you that you took a little bit of what we had started to talk about. But for anyone who isn't familiar, I wanted to just lay a couple grounding kind of foundational stuff about the show, just so you have something to tether to. Like he said, it's a question and answer format show. It's public powered. All the questions come from the audience. I think first and foremost, I think of our show as an explainer show, which actually people sometimes find surprising because they oftentimes think we're a history show. We do delve into history a lot because we're getting into the context of why something is the way it is today. But sort of the heart of the show is about explaining things. People would probably call us highly produced, which is a weird thing to like self-assign yourself. So I put it in quotes. And that just basically means for anyone who isn't an audio maker here, we work from a script. We are refining every little thing about the music, and we're layering in sound effects. This is not a show where we are turning on a microphone and talking for an hour and a half. I love those podcasts, no diss to them, but this is one where we're really kind of thinking about every second of the show and how it sounds and what it's doing for our audience. And it's weekly, it's ongoing. We never get a break. So you hear what we produce in a week usually. So
sometimes that week.
Yeah. So that is in the nutshell, Bay Curious.
And we wanted to tell you a little bit more about who makes it. We are the core team, the 2 full-time producers. Olivia is the host and senior editor of the show, and I'm the producer, and I also edit. So we actually both kind of do everything because it's a really small team, and we are often like handing things back and forth. Olivia definitely like sound designs and scores. It's like not like I'm the only person who touches the tape. And we talk a lot about how to envision a story editorially. But then we also we get 4 hours a week with a KQED sound engineer. So we definitely want to shout out that we do get some support from a professional who really makes it extra special and sparkly. So we often like give him a mix that is what we want it to sound like mostly, and then he finesses it, makes the levels great, sometimes adds some extra special reverb or something that we maybe don't have the tools to do. And then we also just want to shout out that we work with a bunch of reporters, both freelancers and in-house KQED reporters, to answer questions. And so while I do some of the reporting and Olivia is definitely doing reporting as the host, we are also editing a lot of other reporters who contribute to the show. So that's who makes it. And we wanted you to just know that so that you can, like, these things that we make, you can make too. There's only 2 of us. So.
2 with some wiggle room. Okay, and then the last kind of setup thing we want to talk about is just kind of our goals with Bay Curious. What's kind of like the ethos behind the show? What are we thinking about as we're making the show writ large? We want all of our episodes to feel sort of deep, thoroughly reported, kind of leave you feeling like there's been no stone left unturned here. But we're also trying to be somewhat efficient with that. We're not going on for hours and hours and hours. We unfortunately cannot make a 3-hour highly produced episode every week. I don't know if I would listen to that anyway. But we are still trying to kind of hit like 15, 20 minutes. We don't have like a time limit like you might on a radio program, but we also don't want to go on forever. So we are trying to be respectful of everyone's time. I think one thing that makes us a little bit different sometimes from some of our colleagues who work in the news, like we are really focused in on maximizing the audience's understanding sort of by any means necessary. Like my goal is that people who listen to this story, everything sticks. They're able to grab it, hold on to it, and hopefully keep it for the rest of time. So when their friends are visiting, they can tell you why Sutro Tower has that weird waist at the middle, and how it might have looked like the Seattle Space Needle had a different design been chosen. So we're really kind of trying to make our stuff as sticky as we can. Also, we want it to be interesting. It is a podcast. People are listening for, entertainment value to some degree as much as they're listening to be informed. So it's got to be interesting. And when appropriate, we try to make it delightful, playful. We're a little silly. We love puns. That's just kind of the personality of the show because it's like the personality of the people making it. So we definitely, I think, lean in sometimes, maybe a little bit too hard to the camp, but we like it. So people like it or they don't.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. It's who we are.
Okay, so this is kind of like the money slide, right? Like this is the slide that tells you the toolbox. These are the things that we're drawing from when we get an episode and we're trying to think about either how to make it sound more interesting or how to bring more life to it or how to make it a little bit more than just bread. So when I say bread, I mean when you listen to an episode, you're going to have narration from the host or from the reporter. You're going to have interviews with experts or people who experience the thing. And that's kind of what I think of as the bread. That's like the content. That's, what the sustenance. But then you want some butter to make it taste good, right? So that is the toolbox. Because when you're talking about science or history, sometimes you don't have people who were there that you can talk to about it. You might have to recreate it using reenactments or music is that's like in every episode because we use it for pacing. If we want you to sit with something for a little bit and like have a moment to like let it sink in, we might give you a little bit of music pause. Music is obviously emotional. It's like of a time and moment and place. So there's like lots of things that music is doing. We also use recorded sound. This is kind of straightforward. If you're a reporter in the room, like you are recording sound when you are out in the field, but you can think about how you record the sound in different ways. So we're going to talk about that. And then found sound effects. These are things that we often layer to build scenes if there isn't really one. Like if you can't go to the place or if the place doesn't exist, maybe, then you might build it out of found sound. And then we use a lot of archival tape. I mean, you referenced that we're often known as a history show. That's in part because we go looking for archival sound, video, radio, audio, any audio anywhere, basically. That always helps. And then finally, if there is no archival tape, we will sometimes create reenactments from documents in order to try to bring something to life.
Yeah. So that's usually like someone voicing something that maybe was in a newspaper or some other written document that we have a primary document, but it's not an audio element. So we kind of turn it into an audio element.
And almost any Bay Curious story is going to have one or more of these elements in it. This is the toolbox.
It's actually a lot smaller than I thought. I thought it would be like so long, but when we really sat down, I was like, oh, it's really just these 5 things. But we, there's kind of variations within the topics that we'll get into. Okay, let's get to our first example. And I will say we're going to pause after each example for like a brief Q&A, and then we'll have a bigger Q&A at the end. So if you have questions as we're going along, like get ready to raise your hand. Tim Olson in the back is going to be a quick draw with the mic, and we'll come mic you up so the folks listening at home can follow along. Okay, so history of the Farallones. This was a story that we had to pull together really, really quickly. And if you know anything about the Farallones, which are a lovely island chain about 27 miles off the coast of the coast of San Francisco, you know that they are not super easy to get to. And we were unfortunately unable to get actually to the islands, which is what would have been my dream. I actually still would really like to get to the Farallon Islands. So if anyone has a ticket on the boat, let me know. But we were not able to get there. So we had to think about how can we bring this space that's very evocative to life with sound. We were also traveling back in time because we wanted to tell kind of the history of basically various groups that have lived on these islands over the years, and kind of what conditions were like at the time. So let's give a little listen to the example, and then we'll dig in on what you're hearing. But be listening for those like 5 items in our toolbox, because you will be quizzed on what you hear at the end of this little clip.
Navigating the waters around the Farallon Islands has always been extremely dangerous. Quick-moving currents can sweep boats onto the rocks, where the Pacific pounds them into oblivion. During storms, waves can get so big, they swallow boats whole. There are about 400 ship and airplane wrecks in the Greater Farallon Sanctuary. In hopes of warding off disaster, a lighthouse was built at the top of the southeast Farallon in 1855. It was one of the first lighthouses built on the West Coast. With it came new residents to the island, 4 lighthouse keepers and their families. As many as 18 people lived on the island at a time in 2 Victorian duplexes. Charles Nordhoff wrote about their lives in an 1874 edition of Harper's Magazine.
The life of the keepers on the Farallon Light is singularly lonely and monotonous. They live in what would seem to a landman like a perpetual storm. The ocean roars in their ears day and night. The boom of the surf is their constant and only music. The wild scream of the seabirds and the howl of the sea lions. The whistle and shriek of the gale. The dull, threatening thunder of the vast breakers are the dreary and desolate sounds which lull them to sleep at night and assail their ears when they wake.
Life seemed to have improved somewhat by 1932, when Mildred Hoover wrote about the islands. She says radio reception on the islands was good, so keepers and their families spent their evenings dancing.
All right, so what did you all hear in that clip? What kind of extra elements? Reenactment. Yes, we heard a reenactment from Harper's Magazine. Seagulls. Yes. Period music. Yes. I think you guys got them all. Yeah. Sound effects, music, and a reenactment. If I could just get my mix on screen, please. That's not it. So while we're getting that figured out, I wanted to talk briefly about reenactments. We have a couple things we're really thinking about when we do employ this one, because we want to be careful that it's not confusing for people, that they wouldn't think like this is actually tape. So we just are always careful as we're like walking into a reenactment or coming out of it to usually identify where this is coming from, that it's a written source. Sometimes if we're worried it's really confusing, we'll even call it out as like, here is a reenactment of blank. So there is, sort of an ethics to it that we're having in mind. And we've also been thoughtful generally about who is voicing them. In this case, it's just a colleague at KQED because we don't have a huge budget, but there have been some instances where we have been able to hire voice actors, which has been really nice. For actually an episode we did about Frida Kahlo, we were able to hire a voice actress who like came from the same sort of community in Mexico that she would have come from. So we hoped that the sort of the voice would be as authentic as possible. Here's a mix. I think I always like seeing mixes, so I was like, we have to show people mixes. So yeah, one thing that's kind of nice here is we also have layered the sound effects. So you mentioned the gulls. There's actually, it's a little hard to hear on the speakers in here. It's much better on the headphones. So if you like what you hear, hit them up at home. But we also have like a little bit of ocean sound, and kind of, this is kind of like a windy ocean. Let's like just isolate that and hear it. So kind of like distant waves, maybe breaking kind of beneath you. And then these are our gulls, which they kind of come up. There's some waves in that one too. I'll tell you a little bit about where we find these in just a moment. And then we also had this music cue playing. I think a lot of times like our strongest, I don't know, sound design stuff comes when we're kind of layering several sound effects, music, and just making a nice like layer cake of delightful things. So we have this kind of like sea traveling song. And one thing I think about as we're doing all of this is I really try to, as we're trying to kind of create these atmospheres, is really thinking cinematically. So what I tried to do in the first part of this is almost act as if we are like in the ship with these people like circling the island. We can kind of hear the waves and the gulls, and we're getting a sense of like what this place is like. And then when we kind of move onto the island with our created archival voiceover, then the sound changes a little bit to sound more like you're like actually on the island. So we'll hear like a little bit again. So think about that as you're listening this time.
Navigating the waters around the Farallon Islands has always been extremely dangerous.
So yeah, the camera in my head is like
Quick
circling
moving
the
boats can
island. It's
sweep
like a
boats
drone
onto the
shot
rocks,
maybe, or
where
you're
the
on a
Pacific
boat.
pounds them into oblivion.
And then yeah, once we're kind of there,
The life of the keepers on the Farallon Light
it's a little
is
quieter,
singularly lonely and monotonous.
but then kind of
They
the
live in what
wind
would seem
starts
to
to
a
pick
land
up as we're
like a
learning more about
perpetual
how
storm.
treacherous the winds were.
The ocean.
And then in kind of the final, part of this little clip we were playing, we are hearing about how when radio came to the island, and we get to hear this like lovely kind of song that people might have been dancing to. And at least in my head, I'm thinking, there's bistro lights strung up outside these Victorians. The families are dancing, and we're kind of leaving that scene. So you kind of will actually hear the sound is kind of fading, and it does a little reverb. And in my head, my mind's eye, which is what I'm trying to put in your mind's eye, is the camera is like leaving the island. We're kind of about to go away. So
She says radio reception on the islands was good, so keepers and their families spent their evenings dancing. The lighthouse keepers and their
it's like disappeared in smoke. So yeah, that's kind of what I can say about that piece. I did want to touch briefly on where we get our sound effects. And again, we are a scrappy. That's complimentary. Scrappy little show. So a lot of times we use Freesound, which is a great resource. It's basically like a crowdsourced sound effects library. Wild variation in the quality of the recordings here, but you can usually find something decent in there. Just pay attention, of course, to the attribution requirements for each piece. A lot of them are just like open, use it, I don't need credit, whatever, but some people do have tougher requirements in here. So we use this a lot. And I could just show you if you haven't used it, like call out a sound that you might want to hear. Whale. So we have whale muffled screaming.
You sometimes have to be careful because sometimes people will also like create things here. So you just read about it.
Yeah.
Make sure you know what you're doing.
The star ratings that other users have given it, I find very helpful. And how many times it's been downloaded is like this little icon here. That's usually also an indicator of quality. But yeah, so we use this a lot. We also will sometimes, if we find something on YouTube that we really like, sometimes we'll grab something from there. Again, we have to sometimes like reach out and get permission for something like that, but it's easy to grab stuff off YouTube. There's a lot of programs that do it. We use one called Audio Hijack, which I think is like $30. And then we oftentimes will also use our music library. We use APM, which is, I don't know the cost of it. It's not insignificant. But a lot of times you can find sound effects in there, or sound effects are like a part of music oftentimes. So sometimes when I want a sound effect, I'll think, oh, maybe there's music that can be evocative of that sound effect as well. And I can use music instead of the sound effect.
Clock ticking or something like that might be in a song.
Yeah. And like you might not want something on the nose, like an actual clock ticking, but maybe just something that's like got that rhythmicness to it. So music can sometimes evoke the sound effect you want. And it's even nicer, honestly, because it's music.
Yeah. Less direct.
Any questions about this example before we move on to the next? Yeah, so the question, just in case anyone at home didn't hear, when we decide to grab a sound from here versus go and grab it ourselves, well, the next example is more about grabbing them ourselves. So some of that will be covered.
I mean, ideally, if you're there, you would grab it yourself. In this example, we didn't go to the Farallon Islands. So it was sort of like, we need to make a scene in a day, and we are writing it and creating it with the sound that we can find. Sometimes we will grab stuff from like older episodes that we did, like, I don't know. I've recorded lots of beach sounds, so I like know it'll be in like an old story and maybe we use that. But sometimes it's just like, what do we need right now? But I would say that if I was like directing a reporter as they're going out, I would be like, yes, get that sound while you're there.
Yeah.
There was another one in the back.
In the back? Oh, right behind you, Tim.
I'm curious for archival materials. If there's any licensing or fair use considerations there.
Yeah, I mean, there always is. But a lot of the stuff that we find, well, let's see, really depends on what it is. But some archival stuff is from libraries. So you can just ask for permission and often like give credit. Like we use the Divas. Yeah. The real library, like the Bancroft Library or the San Francisco Public Library. I love both of those places. But like, they digitize stuff too. So you can often like find it without going to the library. We use, what is the Divas State?
SF State. Diva Commons is really great for like San Francisco specific videos. They have just like a ton of news videos, mostly from the last, 60 years.
And then, there will be stuff on YouTube. It's kind of a case-by-case basis in terms of like deciding when we can and can't use stuff. We do often reach out to, like, if it's a documentarian or something, we might ask for permission to use the footage that they have. Even like we did a story about critical mass where there was like a users had collected sound of like moments in critical mass history, and we like asked them if we could use it.
Yeah, I think we actually paid that documentarian some too. So we will sometimes pay for archival material as well if we really need it and it's really valuable.
But a lot of people like just want their work to be heard and mentioned. So if you say we got it from this documentary, people are more likely to go watch the documentary.
Yeah. All right, let's. One last question. Yeah.
Find a sound you use.
Great question.
It's in flux. So the easiest answer is we have several external hard drives that are duplicative of each other, that periodically, maybe once every 6 weeks or so, I'll back up off of, because we do everything on the cloud. I'll move everything from the cloud to the drive, and that's where it lives. And then that drive gets backed up to KQED has like our own vault that everything gets backed up to periodically. This is changing, and we're working a little bit more closely with our archive management system now. So we're archiving more often, and we're getting trained currently to archive directly to KQED's system. I will say it's still easiest to pull it off the hard drive. So I don't know.
Have you ever lost anything?
We had
yes, and like we didn't have great archiving hygiene for the first,
3 years.
And a half. It wasn't that bad. Year and a half of the show. So there is a certain date where like anything earlier than that, like we have the MP3, obviously it's in the podcast feed, but the mix is gone.
Yeah. And KQED had like a big breach that like took a lot of stuff a long time ago.
Yeah. You can Google it. There's news articles about it, but we lost a ton of content in that breach.
Yeah. But this is a perpetual problem because you only have so much space, right? Like if it's either your chips or it's your drives, they all can fail. So like just put them at more than one place is what I would say.
And the hard drive, they die, right? Like we have had hard drives die. So it is important to make sure like you
Check
have
it.
Yeah. Pretty much all of ours are on 2 hard drives, which is not like still the best. Like you want to have things usually 3 places, I think is what archivists like. And you want to have them linked. So if you make a change, there's like the changes keep getting made anyway.
And if you have something that you know is gold, like maybe you just have a separate special folder that's like, I managed to get the sound of a emu or something. Like I'm keeping it over here so I know where to find it.
I love that that's your example.
Seems hard to get.
All right.
Moving on.
We'll move on to the next example. We will have a lot of time for Q&A at the end.
Okay, so this is kind of straightforward reporting. We're using just sound that you collected yourself. So I collected this sound. Let's listen to it. I'm not saying it's great.
Low tide is early in the morning on the day I venture out to find the forester. Our question asker, Cameron Toby, is with me as we meet up with Virginia Delgado Martinez, a naturalist with the East Bay Regional Park District.
So you asked about the forester?
Yeah.
Nice. What got you interested?
I saw a Facebook post from the Martinez Historical Society about it. It was while it was at low tide, where you could actually see the whole ship because the tide was low enough that it was sticking up out of the mud.
The Martinez shoreline is a tidal marsh. Water levels rise and fall with the tides.
You're standing on salt grass. And if you look carefully, you might see the crystals of salt growing on it.
Oh, yeah.
It's a beautiful walk out through the grasslands to where the Carquinez Strait meets the shore.
All right, folks, here we are.
Whoa.
We are at the schooner Forester, and it is really low tide. If you don't mind getting muddy, you can even walk out there.
I did wear my good boots.
What's left of the schooner looks a little bit like a broken down pier. It's clearly man-made, but from shore, it's hard to tell it was once a boat. Of course, I want a closer look.
If I remember, there's a trail of bricks that you can follow right up to it.
Very squishy. All right, I'll follow you.
It's about to get really deep.
Ah, gross. I don't know about this. It's totally going to get all inside my shoes.
The mud was too deep. I didn't make it out to the Forester. Now, this schooner only had one captain for her whole life.
Okay, so that's it. That's all sound I collected. So I wanted to use this as an example because this is the beginning of the story. It's about a shipwreck in Martinez, which is like a juicy topic. And ultimately, Olivia has told us before this part that we're going to hear the history of the Forester in 4 parts. And it was quite, I did a lot of research. There's a lot of history in here. There's a lot of mariner history in here. But to get you interested, I wanted you to come with us to see the shipwreck. And so, the way that I think about sound gathering here is most of the information is delivered by my tracking, right? I'm telling you where we are, what we're seeing, what it looks like. But there's all this sort of interstitial audio, I call it, which is it's the butter, right? It's not really telling you anything. It's just more fun and kind of putting you in the place. It's the salt on the grass. There's a lot of wind. You can hear that. So you have to be aware of that. It's the mud and the fact that people are interacting in the space. And I think just one thing that I find a lot when I work with, especially newer reporters, is people are so focused on recording the people telling them the facts that they forget about all this other good stuff that happens when you meet up with somebody, just that little interaction between the ranger and the question asker, and including the question asker in the story. He's a character in the story. He's telling me how to get out to the boat. We're doing that together. And I'm in the story, right? I'm a noob who brought the wrong shoes and doesn't want to walk in the mud, So I'm making fun of myself a little bit, and that's funny. It's lighthearted, and also it just breaks down the barriers a little bit and hopefully makes it more interesting.
Yeah. And I think, again, to get back to the cinematic nature of what we're trying to kind of do with a lot of this sound is, as they're walking, I'm okay, putting distance between the parking lot and where we're going to the ship. She's mentioning salt grass. Okay, the field is now full of salt grass. Okay, we've gotten to the edge. Now it's muddy. So there's a ring of mud. It's low tide. So there's maybe some water out there, but it's low. All these things are kind of starting to piece together in my head. So I have this very, visual sensation about what's going on, even though it's truly happening in an audio medium. So yeah, for me, this story when I think about it now, years later, I don't remember when you did this, but it's probably been 3 years.
2021. I think.
This is the scene that I actually remember the most because it's so visual.
And
how it's laid
there's
out.
movement. You know, if you think about, like, people talk about that in photography as well, like show movement in the shot, which is like interesting because it's a still image, right? So this is kind of similar. It's like, you can't see this, but how can I take you on this journey with me? Another example of this is from a different story about Parchester Village, is this early housing development in Richmond that was meant to be integrated and ultimately but there's a scene that I'm really proud of producing because the reporter didn't actually realize they had all this gold in their tape. And then as I was like putting the mix together, I was like, oh, there's all this interstitial conversation between these two friends as they're like setting up the interview. So, you know, the reporter was like, well, they were kind of off mic and like they were just talking about coffee or whatever. It's not a big deal. But we put that into the story because it gives you the sense of like, these women are close. They like are talking about like, oh, I got this coffee for you because I know you like it, you know, and like I put together this whole spread of breakfast for you. And like, it's not about the story. I mean, it's not telling us anything about the information that's in the story, but it makes us feel like we're there with them. It makes us know who they are. And the story was ultimately about the community that was built at Parchester Village. And so we're like showing what that looks like by these interactions between the people. And to me, that is called like audio texture, you know, like the interviews are one type of texture, the narration is another type of texture, and then like interstitial audio is like a third type of texture.
Yeah. Show, don't tell.
Mm-hmm.
Your favorite mantra. Just got kicked out of my own computer. Okay. I don't think we need to see that session, so we can move on to the next example.
No music in that one, though.
Ooh, it's going to get wild. So this next example is from our story that we did this last October. We did a 4-part series called Boo Curious, because I told you we love a pun. And Amanda Font was the reporter and producer on this. She was actually working on the show while Katrina was deployed on another project for a while. And she was really keen to do a story about the Church of Satan, which was founded here in San Francisco by a man named Anton LaVey. There was sort of a headquarters that was this black Victorian that was sort of a landmark for people for the many decades that it was there until it was eventually torn down and is now like a very anonymous apartment building. But we had done this fantastic interview with Anton LaVey's partner, who had also been at one point a high priestess in the church. The man himself died in 1997, but she had this great interview. She was writing the story. And she came to me and was just like, it's just not, it doesn't have any, you know, it's just kind of lacking something. Even though the interview is great, the story is really fascinating, it just is lacking something. And I asked if she had plumbed the archive yet. Like, what's out there? Can we hear Anton LaVey? I want to hear his voice. This isn't that long ago. There's probably recorded materials of him. And she had done a little poking around, but I was like, go spend like 4 hours and just find everything you can on Anton LaVey. Don't worry about rights yet. We'll figure that out later if we need it. Like, just go find what you can, hit up YouTube, look at documentaries, like go to Blockbuster in Bend, Oregon if you have to. I don't know. Find what you can about him and then we'll just see what you do. And she came back the next day with just sparkles in her eyes. And she's like, I have so much material. It's amazing. So let's listen to, I will say this was the hardest one to find the clip from because it's so throughout the whole thing. But let's listen into the one clip that I did select.
LaVey was making a living through the church, taking speaking engagements and charging initiation fees for new members. He also sometimes worked as an organist at local clubs. He spent more of his time making art and music, another passion.
He got the most joy out of playing keyboards because he could control the entire orchestra.
He even pressed a record. Much of it includes recordings of early satanic masses, but also just, you know, some songs.
His specific aesthetics were very much in the 40s. It brought him back to his childhood. So a lot of the precepts of Satanism that he developed are very much grounded in his creative self.
When you start to dance, your hula hips and trance, then you shake it up and down.
And then in the 80s, there was the satanic panic going on.
In the 1980s and through the 90s, there was a national wave of fear that quote-unquote satanic cults were taking over.
Anton LaVey, perhaps the best-known Satanist in America, compiled his years of cult knowledge into two of Satanism's most important handbooks, the Satanic Bible and a companion, the Satanic Rituals.
This is from an hour-long police training video from 1993, filmed in San Francisco, that was created to teach law enforcement how to spot satanic symbols and investigate satanic crimes.
So, so this one, I mean, you just heard it, but had the music that was actually him playing the piano. You heard him singing that like very cute and sweet and campy song, which I will say this comes like 14 minutes into the story of Anton LaVey. So you've heard about a lot of his philosophy and starting the Church of Satan. And he's like kind of this, I mean, he's a quirky guy, but he's kind of a quirky, more serious up until this point. And then you really kind of see this like lighter side of him through this song. So it's a little bit of a moment of comedic relief, I think. And then we get this hit with this like police training video, which is just wild. And yeah, it's an hour long. And we play a little bit more of it later in the piece, but was really training people to look out for these Satanists. And yeah, that was all stuff that we were able to find in the archive, get permission to use and use. The one thing that wasn't in this clip that I did just want to also maybe play from the mix itself is we were also able to find a lot of interviews of him. Again, when you're doing a story on someone who's no longer around and you want to have their voice, you don't have a ton of options. But especially if it is in the last, so many years, if you can find recorded material, it's so nice to hear someone's actual voice because there's so much personality in voice. So yeah, I just want to play this little exchange that we used in the intro to kind of a little bit set up who LaVey was, but also how perhaps a lot of the mainstream public responded to him.
70.
Who ordained you a satanic priest?
I would say probably I received the call. Just as any fundamentalist...
Well, most of us do, but we fight it.
Well, I fight it. This is, of course, the whole principle of my religion. All of the concepts...
What do you mean you received the call? You mean one day the devil said, go out, Anton Zandor LaVey, and give people hell? Huh? Is that what happened?
That's about it. That's about it. Because people like to have a hell of a time, don't they?
How did the... So yeah, also just another gem that we found in the archive.
I would just double down on using people's real voices if you can, because especially in historic stories, like we're very aware, very curious that like a lot of times people will ask us questions about landmarks in the Bay Area. And what we know that's out there, the history that's been written or the newspaper articles that have been written are often from like one perspective and leave out a lot of other perspectives. So we are usually trying to kind of undermine that or like bring something new
complicate
to
the
it,
narrative.
complicate the narrative. And so like the best way to do that is when people can speak for themselves and not be like spoken about. So like that's where oral histories are super helpful. And like the Bancroft Library has done a lot of oral history projects, as has the San Francisco Public Library. Like you wouldn't even know. I mean, they're hard to find sometimes, but like people are out there that have spoken about their lives, not even thinking they were very important. And yet they might be speaking exactly about the thing that you're doing the story about. And then they get to say it for themselves. And we get to like contribute something to the historical record that's different than what, the white reporters at the time were saying about something.
Do you want to talk about the current one you're working on?
So I'm working on the story right now about, we got a great question about how Black San Franciscans managed after the 1906 earthquake, and how, whether they were got resources to sort of reestablish themselves and like what was going on in the community at the time. And actually I found this oral history because I subscribed to all of the SF Public Library listservs. And I saw that there was a event where this artist in residence had found this first person oral history of a man who survived the 1906 earthquake. And she had kind of reinterpreted it and done some art around it and was presenting on it. And so I interviewed her. And then I also found the original oral history that we sort of cleaned up because the audio was not that good. But you get to hear this man who was like 20 during the 1906 earthquake and lived until into his 90s talking about his memories of the quake. So that's super cool.
Of like the wall falling off his apartment.
Yeah.
Like wild stuff. So any questions? I think we maybe forgot to stop after.
Yeah, questions
one
on
of
both
them.
of those.
Yeah, sorry.
If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand.
see
Tim's
one
got the
hand.
mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm curious to what extent when you receive a question, because you started talking about that a little bit, the possibility for the kind of sound storytelling influences whether you choose to do it. Because both of these feel like opportunities must have immediately jumped out at you to be able to plumb the archival footage and everything. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely on our minds. There are definitely some questions that we are interested in, but we're like, ooh, this is going to be a tough one to make work as a super evocative audio piece. I will say we have a Bay Curious newsletter that goes out once a month, which is a great place that we answer a lot of those types of questions. But yeah, we're definitely thinking about it. And a lot of times the first step when a reporter is sort of deciding on, usually we present a couple of questions to a reporter. And the first step inside of the pre-reporting phase is to sort of see what is out there source-wise, material-wise, like what could this sound like? Because we don't want to get too far into a story and then realize, oh, this is a really quiet story. There's nothing we can do here.
That does happen, though. I mean, sometimes we think it'll be really easy to get sound. Like a good example is recently I had a story about school buses, and I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I'll get on a school bus. I'll record all the cute kids, and it'll be so easy and great. And then nobody would let me on a school bus. Nobody would let me talk to a school bus driver. Like, nobody rides a school bus. We like had to basically like fabricate sound about kids and schools.
You found your way in, but yeah,
half the districts wouldn't even talk to me. I was like hard to even get anyone to like be recorded. So it was a surprisingly hard story.
We've definitely had some that we think are going to be hard that are easy. We think are going to be easy that are hard. But I will say, after we've been making this podcast for like 8 years, I think we've gotten, not to like pat ourselves on the back, I think we've gotten decent at like making something out of nothing a lot. Like we oftentimes are like, okay, what's the bag of tricks? How can we like make this work? And a lot of times it comes down to like writing it. Like, sometimes I'll tell someone like, we got to write the hell out of this because we don't have a lot of sound. So like the writing has to be really good to keep people on board.
One other like kind of sixth trick actually in the toolbox is a two-way. Like if it's a boring story, it might be more interesting to hear us talk about it with two people and like the interplay between us with some tape than to try to script it, because then it will just sound like a boring feature. Yeah. That's what we did for the school bus story.
Hi there. I'm wondering if there have been any times on the show when you feel like you've produced something that is too sound designed, or you sound designed too close to the sun, and things got too busy. And I'm wondering how you navigate that line between creating something that's highly produced and something that's way overproduced.
Yeah, I mean, I even like picking some of these out, I was like, oh, I would do that differently now. Do I really want to share this? But like, we are all works in process, right? Like when we started the show 8 years ago, I had never hosted a podcast before. I'd never mixed a podcast before. I'd never spoken into a microphone before. So like the last 8 years of this have been a learning process. And if I feel shame about parts of that process, like, I don't know, it's just like not valuable, I guess. So I don't stress about it too much. I just say like, okay, that was too much. Let me learn from that for the next time. Because yeah, we definitely have flown too close to the sun on some occasions.
Just too on the nose.
Too on the nose. Yeah. And like our tastes evolve too. You can also like when I hear older stories, my writing is different. The way I produce the show is different. The music I select is different. Like we're all evolving. So yeah, it happens all the time with every episode.
Well, and podcasts are different. Like there was a time where like it was novel to say hello in the podcast, like to your source, like when you meet them. And now I'm like, I don't want that in there. Never put a hello in there.
Like a knock, knock, knock.
Yeah, like it's in there. It's in so many podcasts all the time that now it's like, done.
Cliche.
So like we need new things. So yeah, I think the medium has changed as well. And I was going to say, we also get other people to listen. So that's always a good tool. Like we're two people, we listen to each other's work, but like we have friends in the building that we just will ask to listen and give feedback. And sometimes they'll be like, no, that was too much. Take that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, listen to the people who are giving you feedback because it's a gift. It truly is. All right. Any other questions before we move on to, I think, what will be our last example?
Yeah.
Have you had experiences where you can't find the rights holder on something that's like kind of obscure, and then like you can use it if you do your due diligence, but what is that? And especially when you're on a quick, I'm just curious if you've had that experience. Like, how hard are you supposed to look?
Yeah. There's not too many examples, and I don't think any of the examples are happy endings, because I think for the most part it's like we couldn't reach them. We felt like we definitely needed permission, so we just like couldn't use it. I think especially with music, that's been hard. Like even, I mean, I don't know how much everyone knows about music here, but even like the recording artist oftentimes doesn't have the rights to give you their music if they're in contract with a record company or something. So yeah, somebody like wants, they're a source on our story. We are talking about their music, but then we don't have the ability to play their music because their record company wants us to pay like $3,000 for a song, and that's not our budget. Sorry. So yeah, I don't really have anything like super optimistic to share about that. I mean, I do think, what's the year? Like before a certain year.
1927.
1927.
And it goes forward every year.
Yeah. Anything older than 1927, you can pretty much grab.
It's in the public domain.
It's in the public domain.
At least with photos.
So that's nice.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we ask the public library for stuff a lot. We are friends with them. But yeah, no, I can't think of a story I've worked on where I couldn't find the rights holder. Okay, so speaking of music, this next example is a music example. So this is a story about Russell City, which was a part of Hayward. Let's just go ahead and play it. This is the introduction to the story. So.
In the 1950s and 60s, if the wind blew just right, you might have heard blues wafting over the bay near Hayward. Music from greats like John Lee Hooker, who you're hearing now. Or Big Mama Thornton. She recorded her R&B chart-topping Hound Dog years before Elvis Presley made it a worldwide sensation. People from all over the world would flock to music clubs on the outskirts of Hayward to hear some of the best blues around, all in the unincorporated community of Russell City. It had no paved roads, no electricity, but it was poppin'.
Oakland, Richmond, LA, you better put Russell City in there because some of the greatest artists of our time were right here in Russell City.
But the music abruptly stopped in the 1960s. Alameda County and the city of Hayward sent bulldozers to tear the predominantly Black and Latino community apart. They used eminent domain to seize the land and turn it into an industrial park.
What they tried was cultural genocide. They tried to remove everything that was a reminder or everything that would create a question.
So-called urban renewal projects that targeted communities of color were pushed through time and time again in the Bay Area and across the country. Today in the show, we're exploring the history of Russell City, the community it was, the legacy it left, and what happened to the people who once lived there. I'm Olivia Allen-Price, and you're listening to Bay Curious.
So I wanted to play this story, one, because I like it a lot and you should go listen to it. And two, because this is the intro. And in this story, music was like the real hook for the story. There's a lot of history in Russell City that a lot of people don't know about. It's sad history. But music is such a universal, like people love music, right? Like a lot of us have heard of those artists, even if we didn't know they played in Russell City. So this is a way to get everybody interested in this story and caring about what's going to come next in the story. And we also wanted to use it as an example because it's a question of fair use. Can we see the mix?
Yeah.
So like those first 2 songs are real artists. They played in Russell City. And in this case, we use them because we are specifically talking about them playing in this place and their music and what they did. So we can use their songs, but we can't use much of it. So like those first 2 music lines, those are like pretty short, especially where it's like really present. And then there's another music chunk later, which is from the database, the APM database, which is like evocative of the same time period. But like when we're using it for more like background, just vibes, you cannot use an artist's music. So it's just really important to know the rights around fair use, because they can like pull your entire back catalog if somebody were to come after you and say like you misappropriate, you used my music without paying me or whatever. So you have to be aware of that, and we very much were in this case, but we and KQED's lawyers agreed that it was okay to do it in this case, and I think it really made it stronger. And I will just say that like the reason I would say go listen to this episode beyond the intro is because this is another one where, you know, the folks who lived in Russell City and were pushed out of Russell City were children. The people who are still alive were children when that happened, and they are now like in their 70s and 80s. And we went and found a lot of them, and they told their stories about what they remember about Russell City and what happened. And it's much more powerful because it's their voices.
Yeah. We do have one more example, but we're also like kind of almost out of time. What do we think? One more example? You guys down for one more example? Okay, we'll do one more example. Which is, this one's fun. Okay. So this is science. I love science. And yeah, a fair amount of Bay Curious stories are sort of science explainers, which from a sound design perspective are sometimes, I think, the most fun, because describing what's happening scientifically in the audio space can be really difficult. But if you really just score it or sound effect it just right, you can really make it stick. So I love science stories. This I would say is like a decent example. I think we maybe have done it better, but I wanted to share this one because it was top of mind, I guess. So this story was about basically, can we have the ocean be a renewable energy resource for us? Let's hear it.
The U.S. Department of Energy is allocating $25 million to help support a new wave energy testing site. It's located just a few miles from the deep water port of Newport, Oregon. There, companies are racing to turn ocean waves into electricity, and one California company is in the running. In 2022, a little over a quarter mile off of a pier at the University of San Diego, a 16-foot wide blue octagon-shaped device called X-Wave was submerged underwater and tethered to the ocean floor. As the water swirls around it, the device moved in a circular motion with it, around and around.
So it's pretty much similar to a wind turbine, just with the difference that the wind turbine always runs in the same direction. In our case, the waves just go in circles.
Marcus Lehman is the co-founder of Cowwave Power Technologies, the Oakland-based company behind that blue device.
I forgot one thing when I should have set this up. I'll just tell you now. The device that we visit in this story is no longer there. And so it wasn't at the time that we did this story, but we really wanted to try to explain like what at least one of the prototypes that would be trying to capture this energy kind of looked like, roughly how it worked. And yeah, we were just really struggling because the company had like one video they could give us, and it had this like really awful music behind it the whole time. So like any of the sound that wasn't there was just totally unusable. They couldn't give us the raw anything. So we're like, oh gosh, like how do we, try to describe this? It's not the most complex process, but it's also not the most obvious, because I think I would assume the way it would generate waves would be more like back and forth. So like the idea that it's like going in a circular motion is sort of weird. The idea that it's actually submerged and not somehow sitting more towards the top of the water column was something that I maybe wasn't expecting as a layperson coming into this space for the way we parachute into stories. So I can show you kind of briefly what this mix looks like, because it's a little wild. as wild as we get anyway. I've seen some mixes from like Radiolab that will just blow your mind, but this is wild for us. So yeah, we kind of have this. Let's see what some of this was. We have like this ambient. Oops, where's my playhead? Oh, gulls. We love gulls. We love gulls.
Diego, a
We love
16
gulls. We got some waves crashing.
shaped device.
We've got some watercraft. Sounds like ambience going on. I think for me, like what really makes this work is the music that we selected. Kind of, I don't love the start of it, to be honest, but I like how it develops.
In 2022, a little over a quarter mile
got,
off
like-
of a pier at the University of San Diego,
I don't know. It's a little dated, but it kind of has this like tinkly kind of like water evocative sound going on for me. It's a little bit, this is a science explainer is kind of, it's like in that, in that sort of language of music. And then my favorite part of this is actually when the thing actually submerges.
X-Wave was submerged underwater and tethered to the ocean floor.
So you get those bubbles as the thing is going in, that kind of like whoosh as it's like kind of getting fully enveloped, just makes me so happy. And then we kind of just repeat this motion a few
Moved in a
times.
circular motion with it, around and around.
And just repeat that a few times as she's kind of talking, and this guy comes in who we then get to know a little bit later. But yeah, this was one that I thought was kind of cool, just because again, we had to create something out of nothing. Like we tried a couple other avenues that would have been more traditional journalism to actually go there and record it, but it's not there anymore. What do you do? So yeah, this is kind of one way that we, hopefully in a fun way that you guys like, got out of that pickle. Any questions? Oh, I see one there.
Yeah, I have a question on, like, say it did exist and you went there and you got some audio, but it like didn't have all of the bubbles, or like it wasn't as evocative, or like you went to the Farallon Islands and they're like there were no gulls and you really need gulls. Do you ever sweeten? Do you keep like the scenes that are real versus recreated like totally separate?
Yeah, I feel like we keep them pretty separate.
Sometimes we'll just decide not to use the real scene because it's not good enough, and we'll just make a new one. Yeah, that definitely happens. I mean, I think one thing that's overrated is boats. I mean, boats mostly sound like motors.
It's wind and motors. Yeah, boats do not make a good
People are like,
story.
I'm going to get to go out on this boat. It's going to be a great scene. I'm like, what are you going to do when you're out on the boat? Because what sound is it making other than...
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, again, this kind of comes back to like that, what I said was like really important differentiation in my mind between us and like what would be like a purely news program is like our goal is, again, like stickiness in the brain pretty much by any means necessary. So that's like really what we're going for. We're journalists by training. Like, I think we have like journalistic values, but I think some things that if like, KQED radio might be uncomfortable with, like we're like, that's cool as long as it's clear to the audience that this is recreated. Yeah.
I think the answer might be kind of similar for this, but how do you decide how much research is the appropriate amount of background research to do for something like this, especially for the things that don't necessarily exist anymore, and so you can't necessarily just like go see it?
Yeah, when you say background research, sorry, do you mean like the reporter doing for the story, or as like a producer trying to figure out like what the sound might be, or both?
Kind of both, like the whole process. Like, how do you know when you have enough?
Ooh. Well, you got to stop sometime.
We can't keep paying you forever.
You don't have enough when your editor has a lot of questions that you can't answer. That's like, I think a lot of people I think some of it's about knowing yourself, honestly. Like some people really like to over-report and they don't like to write. So they just keep reporting so that they don't have to start writing. So I think that is like just something to know about yourself if you're a person like that. And if you're like, okay, I think I have enough to begin. And then maybe like, actually this 1906 story is a good example that I'm working on. I have like the artist and I have the archival tape. So I just wrote a script with that. And then I was like, yeah, I really need a historian. So like I went and found that historian for the context. But like I started being like, maybe I could make this work with just this. And then, no, I mean, I had also done other research, but I need a voice to, flesh it out.
I mean, I will say, I think for a lot of our stories, like 3 interviews, 3 sources tends to be kind of the sweet spot. And I try to like work with reporters to be intentional, like have some conversations about like, who are those 3 people going to be? Because yeah, if you interview 8 people, we can't fit 8 people probably in about a 15 or 20 minute piece. So some of that is going to be wasted time. So how can we avoid wasting your time?
Or
our
like
time?
important background, but not in the story.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, like, yeah, if they say the same things, like if you have 3 people that say the exact same thing, think about who you're talking to and what they provide to the story. And there will be times where like you maybe a first version of a script has more people in it and they say interesting things, but it just doesn't quite work with the story. We might cut out a whole voice, even though it was interesting, just to make it work. So some of it's a little hard to answer because sometimes there's like more in it at the beginning than there is at the end. But
I will say, soup to nuts, most Bay Curious stories take like probably like 40 to 80 working hours from the reporter. And then another, I don't know how many hours from us. They're like pretty labor intensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi. Actually, my question was about that. Could you kind of describe like the typical production process for an episode that you guys do versus one that you partner with a reporter on, from like getting the question? Yeah, I'm just curious, like what all the steps are and how long it takes.
Well, so I do, yeah. I do more of the
I don't
report.
get to report very much, to be entirely honest. I am mostly editing, hosting.
So like a lot of times, how do we do this? So when questions come in, we put some of them in a voting round. So some questions get voted on by the public and they say they want to know a story or have a story. So those ones we have to do. So a lot of times we assign those because we like just know we want someone to get going on them and like be making progress on them. Whereas like stories that I report, like I'm doing a lot of other things for the show each week. So I'm like sometimes not making as much progress on my own stories. But like I oftentimes will take stories that either I'm just like excited to do or I think might be a little trickier. Like a lot of times we're working with like newer reporters who maybe don't have as much experience trying to make something out of nothing. So I'll just take those stories myself. Like especially digging into archives and stuff like that. And I'll do a lot of research and reach out to people, try to find sources, try to find time to go interview them. And then usually I have the tape for a while before I have time to actually like work on the story. Because like what you're basically getting is like I'm trying to plug away at a lot of different stories at the same time that we're trying to make the show every week, and that's laborious. So, how long does it take?
I mean,
sometimes it goes quick. Like sometimes, like I just realized that it's the anniversary of the 1906 earthquake next week, and so I was like, we need to get this story done. So like I'm focusing on it, and it's going to be done in like 2 weeks. So sometimes you just need the fire under you to like do it.
Yeah, most stories I would say take several months. Take several. Yeah. Don't say fire. Most stories take several months. I think our stories, when we are assigned on them, tend to take longer because we are focused on other things.
But if we focus on them, they go quicker.
Yeah. There was one thing I wanted to say about that, but I've forgotten. Anyway, sorry. That's not like the best answer. Is that enough of an answer?
You guys work with a lot of KQED reporters. Like, how do you do that, and how do you like assign them, or do they pitch you? Like, how's that work?
So that's what I was thinking. Like when we get questions, a lot of times we'll be like, this is in so-and-so's wheelhouse. This is a question about electric charging vehicles. We should see if they have time to work on it. It's a little bit of a negotiation because like they have editors and things that they're working on. So it's sort of like, are you interested in doing the story with us? And do you have time? But a lot of the reason that the stories take a long time is because most people have like a bunch of different things they're doing. And so it's just like one of many things on their plate. So that's why like sometimes working with a reporter is slower because they are trying to chunk out time to like make it happen. And that's also why it's slow for us. But then we kind of control the process more if it's our story. So I can just be like, I'm not doing anything else. I'm just going to get this done.
This presentation I put together because she's writing the story for next week.
So I read the Bay Curious book and I absolutely loved it. And I was, as someone who's like currently trying to translate something written into like a podcast format, I'm curious if writing that changed the way that you approach podcast storytelling at all, or if it made you notice contrasts in the way that you did the reporting for each.
Yeah. Oh man. So we want to do like a whole thing on that because there's so much to say about working between those two mediums specifically. I think in general, what I can say is audio stories, because we're spending so much time making it sound delightful and we're usually writing kind of short declarative sentences, when you see it on the page, it feels really thin. So a lot of what thinking about, because the book is I can't remember the exact split, but it's about 50-50 or something, stories that had already appeared on the podcast and stuff that was new material for the book, some of which we're now producing and it will become a podcast. So it's going to go both ways from the book. But a lot of what I had to do when I was working on the book was take the material we had and like add to it, buff it out, change the sentence formats, because when you read a script, it sounds really great when someone delivers it to your ear. It sounds really natural, but when you read it, it sounds like it was written by like, a 7th grader, and I'm an adult woman and I want to sound like it. So the writing styles are just so vastly different. And I don't think I really appreciated that until I was writing a book.
And it goes the other way too. Like if someone's very writerly and they are trying to work on a radio script, like you just cannot absorb that much information when you're listening. And so you have to I think there was an NPR training once where they talked about it as like a breadcrumb of facts, like one fact per sentence, essentially, whereas when you write, it's like dependent clauses and times and dates and links to other things, you just don't have any of that in radio.
Yeah. And I think what's really difficult, actually, especially when we're working with like newer reporters, is so much of our education through school is about writing for the page. And we're trained to write that way. So when you sit down to write a script, you naturally, that's oftentimes when you are getting started, how you're writing. So a lot of my education over the last, so many years working in audio and doing this podcast has been unlearning that, or at least not unlearning it, but putting that to the side for that is when I'm communicating in this form. When I'm writing for my voice for the podcast, this is how I write. And it's, completely different. Okay. I think that's it. Oh, speaking of the book, actually we have 2 things. Are we doing the giveaway? Okay. Well, first I will just mention the next Bay Curious event is April 27th at 6 p.m. It's Independent Booksellers Day. Yay, Independent Booksellers. I'm going to be at Green Apple Books on Clement Street. We're going to do a Q&A about the book, and we're going to play some trivia. So if you think you know the Bay Area, come test your mettle. It should be a lot of fun, so please come out. And we are going to give 1 book away right now if you can name the 5 elements that we talked about in the Bay Curious toolbox. Tim Olson will have the hand.
So you have music, recorded sounds, found sounds, archival tape, and reenactment.
The note taker.
Right.
Awesome. And if you were sad that you did not win the book, they are available for purchase, I think, right? Yes, they are available for purchase. So just come up to the table after and we can hook you up.
And we'll be around.
All right. Please give Olivia and Katrina a round of applause. And also, if you're interested in working with them, reach out. Email is baycurious@kqed.org. And then send links to your work and how you are involved.
And a bullet.
And then so
last thing.
And more email them to find out. Yeah, I know. So we will have a mingle. If you have more questions, feel free to come up. And we're doing a book signing and also a book sale. If you go on we have a link to the book sale, so you can buy books here as well. One last thing is we have a QR code. We'd love to get your feedback on what you thought of the event, any ideas you have for future Podcast Garage workshops, what you liked, what you want to see more of. Thank you so much for coming, y'all.